Good morning. I am Merritt Mitchell-Wajee with Mid-Columbia Fisheries, and I am jointly presenting today with Michael Porter of the Yakima Nation. You are joining the session, Cool Project on a Hot River, a basin approach to restoration of the Yakima Delta. We thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. This project, at the confluence of the Yakima and Columbia Rivers, is a real example of how a diverse group of partners can collaboratively move a project forward, and we thank all of our partners of our region who have worked together to champion this project and other projects in the lower Yakima River, an exceptionally hot stretch of river making salmonid passage extremely difficult, with physical and thermal barriers playing roles, which I will outline briefly today. I will provide a project overview, and then Michael Porter, fisheries biologist with the Yakima Klickitat Fisheries Program, will offer some additional and compelling fish data to support how this project is a critical linchpin to the success of myriad restoration activities in the Yakima Basin. You're going to be hearing this a lot. We just heard from John Palmer about the important work the U.S. EPA is doing on cool water refuges on the Columbia River. Now let's zoom into a project that's just a few miles from our current location. And as we have an international audience, let's see where we are and also acknowledge the connections with our land and its people. The Mid-Columbia region is within the traditional and ancestral lands of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation, Umatilla, Salila Wyam, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Nez Perce, and other tribes. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands and for continuing this role in the present day. The Yakima Delta is approximately 200 miles as the crow flies from Seattle, Washington, and sits at the confluence of the Yakima and Columbia Rivers. The headwaters of the Yakima are near Snoqualmie Pass, and the river is 214 miles long, traversing a variety of biomes ending in the desert. There are also several tributaries feeding the river. The Delta has a long and diverse history full of cultural significance, as it was a favorite fishing camp for our tribal neighbors, even described by Lewis and Clark. The crux of focus today is a 560-foot earthen causeway, circled in red, and how much impact to water quality it poses. The picture in the upper right-hand corner of the aerial reflects water quality degradation in the form of toxic algal blooms and the extremely hot water that are a frequent presence in the delta behind the causeway. Mosquitoes have found the shallow, still water ideal for breeding, and the 160-acre Bateman Island was privately owned but is now owned by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and managed through a 50-year lease by the city of Richland. The area is popular with recreationists, including boating, birding, and hiking. And who is Mid-Columbia Fisheries? Well, Mid-Columbia Fisheries is a nonprofit, community-based organization with an all-volunteer board of directors, which works with landowners and community partners to protect and restore fish habitat. We are one of 14 regional fishery enhancement groups in the state, and we have been involved in this project since 2011. Geographically, you can see how much area we cover in the state. We're number 12 on the map to your right. Much of our region is comprised of Yakima Nation lands. Tribal, private, city, public, state, and federal interests converged in the Yakima Delta, and as you can imagine, with such diverse interests and issues, the project has had its share of challenges. Since 2018, it is now the site of a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Section 1135 Ecological Restoration Project. I'd like to thank my colleague Marcella Apple with the Benton Conservation District for this slide. Marcy has led the effort to understand and ameliorate the temperature barriers in the lower Yakima River. She is an excellent poster on the Amon Creek Thermal Refuge Project at this conference, which is immediately upriver from the Bateman Island project. The lower Yakima River in central Washington is a migration corridor connecting spawning habitats in the headwaters of the Cascade Mountains to the Middle Columbia River. Located in an arid region, the lower Yakima waters are wide, shallow, and too hot, often in excess of 23 degrees Celsius, for native salmon migrants during late spring to early fall. Warm waters cause physiological stress, pre-spawn mortality, and susceptibility to disease, and decrease spawning success for native salmonids. Aerial thermal infrared imaging, TIR, of the Yakima and Columbia River confluence, this was completed in August of 2020, show hot temperatures in yellow that are creating a passage barrier for salmonid migrants in late spring through early fall. The daily maximum temperatures as measured at 3 U.S. Geologic Survey gauging locations are on the lower Yakima River. And in-stream river temperatures are primarily driven in this region by solar radiation and ambient air temperatures during the summer months. My next two slides will show changes over time in the Delta. The causeway was constructed between 1939 and 1940 for agricultural access. We also know that it was armored in the 1970s after a breach. It is really unclear as to who was involved in that. Then things further changed when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers purchased the island from the Bateman family in the 1950s prior to the construction of the McNary Dam. Then the filling of the McNary Pool behind the dam dramatically altered the nature of the Yakima Delta. Since 2011, Mid-Columbia Fisheries has been engaged by looking at thermal issues, flow, and fish passage in the Yakima Delta at the request of local community partners, including the Benton Conservation District, the Yakima Nation, and a regional technical advisory group. Mid-Columbia Fisheries engaged with partners and consultants, including Interra, Gray and Osborne, Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, and others. I do apologize if I've left anyone out, that played a large role in getting us to where we are today. And in 2016, a study concluded a breach of at least half would change things for the better in the Delta. The work over the past 10 years further identified the problem and worked towards the identification of a preferred alternative. In addition, we have had intensive ongoing thermal monitoring in the Delta and the lower Yakima River from River Mile 106 to River Mile 0, implemented by the Benton Conservation District, the U.S. Geologic Survey, and the Yakima Nation, which have proved essential. Bottom line, there's a lot of focus in this basin as thermal issues in the lower part of the Yakima River continue to pose migration issues for fish and health concerns. This image from our 2016 conceptual design study outlines several of the alternatives investigated for modification in the Delta to address poor water quality. This included completely blocking off flow to the Delta in one suggestion. These suggestions came out of a public process which are now supporting the Corps process. The other major concern for this project is the existence of a private and public marina just downstream of the causeway, circled in yellow. These structures were built after the causeway was installed, and increased flows are of concern to the marina owners. This, coupled with the cultural resources, the recreational uses of the island for hiking and bird watching, and other community interests, have made the challenge all the greater. However, as you will see on the next slide, the flow modeling is compelling. Funding from a variety of sources has been critical in moving the needle on this project. From 2011 to today, grant funds from the Washington Department of Ecology, Washington Salmon Recovery Funding Board, and the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, and others have provided project support and scientific research into flow and water quality around Bateman Island and overall implementation. The research included mapping the elevations of the Yakima and Columbia riverbeds, collecting temperature and dissolved oxygen data, and measuring site-specific flow data. These data were used to build computer models of flow and temperature. These models demonstrated that breaching the causeway would allow flow around the west and south sides of Bateman, further supporting our conclusions, as seen in this modeling run. So this project has been envisioned for years with many names, but the same message. The causeway is a complete barrier to fish passage and river flow. The backwater area is ideal habitat for non-native predatory fish. Temperatures in excess of 25 to 32 degrees Celsius are a total thermal block to late migrating salmon. And a new concern, overgrowth of a native aquatic plant called water stargrass, it's pictured here just to the left of our graphic, is a new challenge to passage and water quality. So we've now zeroed in on the project location and its thermal issues. Now for how this project connects to the basin as a whole, which I alluded to in the title of this presentation. The Yakima River Basin consists of approximately 6,150 square miles. Approximately a sixth of the basin, 1,000 square miles, is irrigated agricultural land, depending on river water for irrigation. This image represents projects adopted by the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, a coalition of organizations working collaboratively to manage and enhance water resources in our basin. The Delta restoration is number 3 in the bottom right-hand corner of the graphic. The Delta is a bottleneck and must be addressed. These projects represent a tremendous investment in supplementation facilities and fish passage and screening programs in the Yakima Basin that have led to increased numbers of returning adult salmon over the past 20 years. However, while protection and restoration, primarily in the upper Yakima Basin, has improved conditions for spawning and rearing fishes in upper basin areas, anadromous runs remain well below historical levels, and survival of juvenile anadromous fishes emigrating through the lower Yakima River and McNary Reservoir are often alarmingly low. You will hear just how low from my co-presenter, Michael Porter, in a bit. But suffice it to say, upwards of 90% of some juvenile salmonid groups are impacted. Research by Mid-Columbia Fisheries, the Benton Conservation District, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Yakima Nation, U.S. Geological Survey, and others has shown that conditions in the delta caused by the causeway and predation by both fish and birds is largely to blame. So you can see changes in the delta and the lower Yakima River are critical to the success of myriad projects in the basin. These 10 years of work has resulted in tremendous regional support and interest. Given the complexity of the project, in 2016, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife agreed to become the lead agency with the support of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan and assisted in building stakeholder coalition. Stakeholder concerns included access to the island, impacts to the downstream private and public marina, and any changes to the delta that could impact recreational uses such as bird watching, boating, and access to the existing trails on the island, along with concerns for impacts to cultural resources in the vicinity. So after a series of community presentations in 2016 conducted by a team from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Kennewick Irrigation District, a meeting was held in December 2016 with the above listed stakeholders to reimagine the project to ensure all voices were being heard. Stakeholders agreed that engaging the Corps in the project would bring a level of funding commitment and oversight necessary for a project of this depth and complexity. Given all the interest, having this diverse stakeholder group has been critical. So what's happening now? Since 2016, both Mid-Columbia Fisheries and partners have been increasing our outreach presence in support of the project in the Tri-Cities through a variety of educational activities, presentations, and meetings designed to build. Which leads me to today. I've already mentioned this is now a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project. Under its authority provided by Section 1135 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1986, the Corps may plan, design, and build modifications to existing Corps projects or areas degraded by Corps projects to restore aquatic habitats for fish and wildlife. Projects must be in the public interest and cost effective. The first phase is a 50-50 cost share between the Corps and the non-federal sponsor. Once a project is approved for design and construction, the project cap is $10 million on the federal side. Cost share is then 75% federal and 25% local sponsor. And that non-native smallmouth bass, featured prominently, is being held by my co-presenter, Michael Porter of the Yakima Nation Fisheries Program. You will meet the rest of him later. A few key things to note about the Corps' process is outlined on this slide, and that the Corps concurred with our data and accepted the modeling completed locally since 2011. The feasibility study began with the development of a partnership agreement, a 2-day design charrette workshop with stakeholders, and a public meeting to make sure the Corps team understood the needs and interests of the community. It was agreed that restoration will include improved complexity of the habitat, but also acknowledging the need to not impact any existing cool water refuge areas or cultural resources. In summary, improvements in the Delta are necessary to support millions of dollars of investment planned and already underway in the basin. The Corps is close to finalizing its feasibility study, which will have as its product a publicly vetted preferred alternative and NEPA evaluation, and has utilized many years of partner studies to support moving the project forward. This project has been a tremendous example of partnership and collaboration between natural resources professionals, tribes, local governments, irrigation districts, and other special interests. I'm now going to hand it over to Michael Porter of the Yakima Nation Fisheries Program to further elaborate on threats that exist in the Delta and the lower Yakima for migrating salmonids and the regional urgency to do something about it. Michael?